Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Driving Digital Change with Office 365 and Intelligent Information Management. Don't get left behind. My name is Teresa Resick, and I'm the Director of Market Intelligence Programs here at AIIM. And AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And joining me are Microsoft MVP Heather Newman of Content Panda and Greg Milliken of M-Files. And M-Files is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them very much for their support. And thank you all in the audience for taking the time to join us today. And before we get started, I just wanted to share a few tips for participating in today's webinar. By joining the event live, you can resize the different windows that you have in front of you. I do encourage you to open up the group chat to message with each other and also with a few of us here at AIIM. And it's in the list of the icons across the bottom. So even if you just click on that now and just say hello and let us know where you're listening from, and that'll be a great way to start the conversation. I also encourage you to download the resources we have. There's a wide variety of them there, and that's in that area to the right of the slide of that slides. And when you click on those, it will open in a new browser tab for you, so you can save or download and read that information after our webinar. Encourage you to ask questions of the speakers throughout our presentation, and do that in the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can later in the webcast. I also would greatly appreciate it if you would take the feedback survey. I greatly value and truly read every one of your responses for what you think about what all we said and shared today. And so the survey will open at the end of the webinar, but if you need to step aside at any point, just click on the link for the survey, and those few questions will pop up for you. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And right now I want to take this opportunity to introduce the speakers we have here. Heather Newman is a Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services, and she's also the co-founder and chief marketing officer of Content Panda. And Content Panda is a high-tech business dedicated to creating products that deliver a superior user experience that drives value to businesses. And she's also the founder and CEO of Creative Maven, a marketing consulting firm that accelerates marketing dollars through clarity, consistency, and experience to marketing teams, startups, and enterprise businesses. She's produced thousands of events, campaigns, and experiences in the high-tech and entertainment industries, and she's also the host of the Mavens Do It Better podcast, which is a really cool thing to listen to. And then we also have with us Greg Milliken, and Greg's a Senior Vice President of Strategic Alliances with M-Files. And Greg brings 20 years of management experience in a variety of technology companies to his role, where he oversees worldwide marketing initiatives. And prior to joining M-Files, Greg served as CEO of Alibra Inc., a 3D CAD/CAM software vendor, as well as Vice President of Marketing for Knowledge Revolution, an engineering software vendor. And he had also co-founded Excel Graphics, a 3D graphics hardware provider. And so there's a wide variety of technical experience behind what Greg is talking about today as well. So as we get started in here, I just wanted to point out the three basic things that we're going to be covering today. And it is just listed here. I'm not going to read all the details in here, but a lot of things in here, and the biggest part, which I'm most excited to hear about, is the third section in here with connecting the dots with all the things that the O365 and with the network folders and those line of business applications, and just what that means to put it all into context for you. So there's these three main sections of what we're going to have this really cool interactive conversation today. And so to start things off, I'm going to turn things over to Greg Milliken and let him share his opening thoughts. Greg?
Thanks a lot, Teresa. Really appreciate that. Wow, you really went way back in time. I think you dated me quite a bit there. But yes, I've been with M-Files for a number of years, and and actually opened our U.S. office. So it's been a really exciting experience for me. Really happy to be here talking about this topic, driving digital change. We all hear the term digital transformation and how Microsoft Office 365 is at is really at the center of a big part of that. If you look at Gartner has stated, I think greater than 90% of enterprises are adopting Office 365. Maybe not a big surprise. I mean, we all use Office tools and that, or at least are very much have been exposed to them. But this idea of intelligent information management is what we often talk about, and it's capitalized, I guess, in the title like a proper noun, but we're not always trying to think of that as a new space, if you will, or a new category. It's almost just a description, a literal description, and this Office 365 world and it becoming a driver of digital change is really important to us. And I want to move us to an interesting stat to kind of get the discussion going. And this obviously isn't the only thing of importance, and it may not be of your primary importance necessarily, but it's something that has come up a number of times, and I think it's important to this notion of intelligent information management. This particular stat came out of an AIIM survey around, as you might think, connecting and optimizing Office 365. But the point here is that 55% of businesses, think of that 90% penetration, so it's a lot of it. It's almost the whole market. 55% say one of the biggest ongoing issues with Office 365 is persuading users where to store stuff. Now, the stat here says to manage and share content in Office 365 and not elsewhere. I think that just Office 365. I think that just speaks to the idea that one of the challenges is that information is spread out, and it's in other places. It's in SharePoint. Maybe it's even on your desktop. Maybe it's up in Box or someplace else. Indeed, in SharePoint Online. And the challenge of where is it? And you could see how that would become a driver of pulling you out of the Office 365 world. So with that, I think interestingly to start, we have a poll coming up. And Teresa, I think you're going to kind of walk us through that and see what their experiences are.
Yes, we do. So I encourage everyone to come up to your keyboards and answer this question for us. Which of these challenges are affecting you today? Are the challenge of providing a flexible digital way of working, driving user adoption of the Office 365 line of products, managing content or information that is stored outside of O365 repositories, managing control and visibility over documents and processes inside or outside O365, or knowing where to save and manage information, for example, like which team sites or channels. I realize you may have a few of these things as an issue, but I'm asking you to pick which is your top challenge or obstacle that you're facing right now. So I'm just going to give you a second to answer that question right now. And let's go ahead and just take a quick look at the results here. And since I forced you to only choose one of these, and it looks like the overwhelming response with 57% answering, saying that maintaining control and visibility over documents and processes, regardless where it all resides, is the greatest challenge. So, Heather Newman, I want to invite you in. And does this surprise you? Because the answers are sprinkled around there.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. So lovely to be here, and thank you for joining us. Let's see. Maintaining control and visibility popped up over documents and processes. Yep. I think that one to me is one of the big ones as well. That makes sense to me. Control and visibility of processes and knowing where to save and manage which team site or channel. Yeah, this kind of goes on point with what I believe are the issues we have today. So, yeah, I think our audience is in the thick of it, as it were.
Well, Heather, go ahead and continue from here.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. Thank you all for taking that poll. I was talking this morning to someone. I'm working on a presentation for another event, and we were talking about change adoption. And to me, it is always about, yes, technology and features and all of that, but it is also really, to me, about humans and looking at the human side of things and looking at digital literacy and how we look to represent a change in behavior with some of these things that are new to us. And I think that, we're delivering more than really a set of products here. And Microsoft is delivering more than a set of products. We're really creating a fundamentally different way of working, right? So looking at how we enable that modern workplace and optimize Office 365, how we really accelerate the alignment of both economic, meaning bottom line, but also cultural business drivers as well. And then also really getting us all to a state of really of these two words, both dynamic but stability as well. And I think, it's that the example is like you're riding, dynamic stability is like riding a bicycle where you can't stand still, but you're moving. Because you're moving, it's actually easier. It's not our sort of natural state. So we're kind of learning and moving and adjusting as we're going along. And I think that the poll results show that, we want to understand the processes and where to put stuff and just how to get by in that day-to-day life that we all have using this technology. And to me, that goes back to how do we present change, adoption, and digital literacy into our organizations. And just to go into enabling collaboration a little bit more, this is a very Microsoft-y slide, and being an MVP, I do leverage a lot of that stuff from Microsoft and speak to it. But, I think that one of the cool things about Microsoft 365, which Office 365 fits into, so you got Windows 10, Office 365, and you've got enterprise mobility and security, right? And so these are the different workloads when we look at collaboration that we're using. And, we really want to enable self-service for people, right, so that employees can be empowered to potentially create new team sites, SharePoint sites, Yammer groups, and they all very much share these commonalities that make them a part of what we would use, in our enterprises or in our small and medium businesses, right? So, if you're looking at whether it's an Outlook group or a SharePoint site or a Team site or a Yammer group, I do think one of the biggest things is which do I use and where do I use it, right? And so it's looking at, Outlook is still that, one-to-one email and calendaring. SharePoint is our intranet and content management. Yammer goes across the organization. If you've heard people talk about that outer loop, the bigger loop, and then Microsoft Teams being that hub for teamwork, which is all pulled together through the Office 365 groups, which is that single team membership across the apps and services with all that lovely security and compliance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I think, looking at this holistically and trying to figure out, what is good for my team and for what I need to use when you get down a little bit further in the organizational level is really important. To me, the other thing that I like to show and talk about is this diffusion of innovation theory. And it is a theory that came out in 1989, a long time ago now, but it's one thing I talk about a lot during end user adoption campaign planning, which I do a lot with folks. And so it looks at the adoption of innovation where you have those people that jump in with you right away, the early adopters. Then we have the most people in early majority, late majority, and some laggards. So when we're looking at putting together some sort of an adoption campaign or bringing on new functionality into our lives and our businesses, it's really good to get someone from each of those areas and have them be on that team. So the laggards are going to be the devil's advocate, and if you can win them onto the team, they end up being your greatest champions, which is really cool. And then those innovators are the people that are like probably the ones that have said, I want to use Teams. I want to build out a Teams for this community, and I want channels and all that stuff. And so having all of these people be a part of it, and this curve literally applies to everything when you're launching product, when you're doing a marketing campaign, all of that sort of thing. And if you ever look it up, diffusion of innovation is a really cool thing to kind of check out for when you're building those sorts of things. The next thing that I like to show is, and I have a fancy transition in there. Awesome. So I will tell you at the bottom, don't click on that link. We have put that asset up, and we just changed the website, so that doesn't work anymore, but the asset is there for you to download in the presentation. But this is something I put together a long time ago. It was those of you who remember my sites. I certainly do. My sites have become OneDrive. And so, but I did the first campaign inside of Microsoft to help promote people using my sites. And that was, anyone remember that date? Put it in the group chat. That was like, 2000 and, back in the day. Well, people inside of Microsoft weren't using my sites because we had just sort of put it out there and people didn't know to click on it. And so one of the things I did is I went back and looked at what was our campaign checklist that we used. And you know what? It is the same from way back then than it is today. So looking at how all these different areas, when you're pushing out and driving digital change with Office 365, defining that vision, executive sponsors, key stakeholders, what are your use cases, gathering your champions that map to that diffusion of innovation, releasing in phases, not trying to boil the ocean because we shouldn't be doing that anyway. And then also what's your communications plan? What's that training? The experts, gamification, and then share, measure, iterate. So I know that's a lot to take in, and you're like, oh my goodness, Heather. So that's why we put it into a PDF. But for me, when we're driving digital change, it really needs to come from a place of putting together a campaign in order to do that, right? And also understanding the human element, and not only having innovators, early adopters, all of those, but having somebody from all the different teams. You need IT. I'm a marketing geek, so I'm like, bring some marketing people in there to help. Look at your finance team, your HR team. Having people talk about the use cases that they need and the scenarios really is going to help that figuring out how to drive adoption, especially with something like Teams, for example, right? So let's see, I'm going to go on the next slide. So types of governance in our different areas in an internal IT situation. So, this is a very kind of how Microsoft definitely looks at this. But we're looking at, governance, compliance, and control really should precede that good adoption. Having satisfied users with that frictionless self-service IT manageability I think it is actually an attainable goal. So, what types of governance are we looking at? We've got, solution, discovery, security, container and content, and change management. And so, it's like solution is really how to manage applications like throughout your portfolio. Discovery is how to make sure the right content shows up in a search or navigation experience. The next one, security, obviously, is understanding the risks related to data and sharing in Office 365. That container and content is how to manage a content lifecycle, which is very important to many of you who belong to AIIM and care about information management deeply. And then that change management is how do you really bring all of that through, all of those 4 different types of governance into sort of a change management scenario situation, right? So let's see, let me get to the next slide. Here we go. So the pillars of this really speak to, how we manage that container and content governance. I pulled that one out because I think that one's really important. And so, like, a core theme is definitely sort of employee enablement, where employees are empowered to create the sites they need. And sometimes, like, say inside of Microsoft or other places, maybe a full-time employee can only create certain things, but have you had that conversation internally of who's allowed to do certain things inside your IT area, right? And that's really important because you don't want to say no to end users, but you also don't want to give them the keys to the kingdom as well, right? So I think it's really important to look at, how do we empower employees, identify that valuable content, protect the assets, and then ensure that accountability that we all want. And so sometimes we have to do some limiting, but I think it's also a conversation that isn't just the IT departments to make. And some of you may disagree with me who run IT departments, but I do think it's a conversation that is absolutely worth having. And Greg, you're going to jump in here and talk about compliance a little bit and what you think about sort of what I just said.
Yeah, no, indeed. I thought your slide on governance and how that all the different flavors of that are important areas was right on point. But I also think, too, the survey that, if I recall back, the poll, over half were saying that control and security were key challenges, or at least areas of high importance to them. This speaks to this idea of compliance. And, one of the things that we've often said is that, in the past, compliance was this thing of a group of specialists, kind of quality experts, maybe had the quality manuals, and it was sort of an enforcement exercise. And if you could make compliance simply the product of your day-to-day work, think of it. What compliance is really about is, are you really doing the things that you should be doing? And are the right people seeing what they should be seeing? And then most importantly, can you prove that that's the case? Because very often you could be fully compliant, but it could be just really challenging to prove that you were doing that. I just think there's a whole lot of points there that are resonating. But if compliance became a byproduct of the good work that you did, you complied because your people were trained well or because they followed up on processes. And what we've been trying to really do, and we think it's a part of this intelligent information management concept, is within these growing digital platforms, Microsoft Office 365 we're speaking about now, of course, putting, the underlying framework for control, governance, and compliance. And that's all about, hey, if you're sharing something in Teams, maybe that document is a certain type of document that needs to be routed through a process, or it could not be shared until it had gone through a review and approval cycle. The idea that workflows are part of that, and bring structure, that the notion of permission management and approvals, the idea that you couldn't share something to the wrong people, or you'd ensure that the people that you wanted to see something had the rights to see it. And then having the whole tracking of all of that, that's really what we're trying to do with compliance without necessarily having to think about you're being enforced within a compliant framework or structure. If you could do that and people were just getting their work done day to day, but the byproduct of that was not only the compliance but the easy proof of it, we think that's when these collaborative digital platforms really come into their own. Truly the marriage of world-class collaboration and what we think of as ECM and now content services looking forward, and that world of control and process and governance and compliance. So with that, Heather, I think you had some interesting thoughts around Teams as the hub, if you will, for Office 365.
Absolutely. Yep, and I agree with you on those points. I think it is going back to, with Teams, for example, it's definitely a new world, and we had some announcements this week that, that we've got so many people actively using Teams. It's just kind of unbelievable, the growth of this product. And I think, we've spent a lot of time in SharePoint governance and compliance, right? There's compliance plans, and there's so much complexity there and workflows, just like you were talking about. And I do think, it is important with Teams when sort of going to something that has the underbelly is obviously SharePoint for so much of it and OneDrive. But then you've got this new layer of where do I put this? Do I put it in a channel, and is that team, do I want that team for my, this group of people, and, one of the Ignite announcements was about private channels, right, which people asked for a long time. And, for me, even in my own team, I have a team that is for my entire organization. And then I created another team that was just for finance because I didn't want everybody and their mother to have access to it, right? And I may change that up and maybe change and maybe make that a private channel instead of, an entire full-blown Teams, because you can get sprawl with Teams just like we did back in the day with, SharePoint team services, as we all remember that, And yes, I agree, Tony, there's complexity around legal teams preserving and discovering as well. So, looking at Teams, Teams is, that hub for teamwork, that is that place where we're trying to bring all of those things together, and chat-based workspace, for meetings, calling, Office 365. And, underneath that is really that Office 365 groups. And that team has been working really hard on making sure that people who are administrators can do that administration, security, compliance, and all of that through using groups and really accessing the layer of security that Microsoft has put in. But it definitely is a place where I think folks are asking those questions of, should I put it in OneDrive? Should I put it in SharePoint? And there's some, and Teresa, I think what we'll do also is I'll put some links in also that we can put out later about some really good specific, Mark Cashman's got some really good slides on that kind of thing, explaining what to put where and why, that we can definitely get into, probably not here on this call, but for later for sure. And that persistent group chat, people are starting to use that, and those are held in a certain place. We've got the online meetings that people are leveraging, enterprise calling and voice, depending on what licensing structure you have, and then all of the built-in Office 365 apps that you can pull into Teams at the top on the top nav there. I think as far as IT pros and looking at, those of you who are working on adoption of Teams, I think planning your teams with a team. I was on the team that helped the Skype for Business to Teams migration with Microsoft. And we leveraged and dog-fooded Teams to plan what we were going to do for the teams. And we definitely recruited those champions and figured out, what workloads and places did we want to look at first. And that setting up that smart governance, looking at those plans is really important. And then going through and setting up your teams and channels, mobile application, and then what are the popular apps? Like for me, OneNote, I live, die, and breathe in OneNote. And so that is a big piece of all of my teams that I use with people. And then how do we leverage the resources that Microsoft has put out there? And there's some really good ones in the adoption area that I have a slide to that we'll speak to later. So Greg, talking about digital natives, I think is a really good thing because Teams is so new and some of the other things that are happening. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, indeed. This, this idea, I know we're all seeing it and dealing with the, just really explosion of technology, not only data. We're obviously always talking about content and information, but just the explosion of technology and ways to interact. I would point out this number 4 on here that's pertinent in my mind always. It's speaking about digital natives here, but I think it's all of us really. I mean, think back when, and I know you've heard this in other places too, but when your work environment was where you had the most power, compute power and technology and all of that, that seems to have totally flipped. And, the idea that in your phone, you've got this extreme power and flexibility and mobility, obviously, that just being fundamental to this digital natives, as we call them, younger folks coming into the workforce who were brought up that way. I think that's an interesting one. It's flipped, that now our consumer or our personal lives are where now the business environment is having to catch up. Teams and this digital transformation I think is a real key part of that. This number 1, the idea that 33% of the workforce are what we would call digital natives, people brought up in the world of smartphones and apps and online connectivity. By 2025, not too far away, 75%. Some of this is just kind of a little humorous, the sleeping with the phone. I can attest that my daughter does do that. I don't do it quite yet. But, this idea of, I think, enabling those folks while not alienating maybe those who are not that. I think that speaks to, this number 5 and number 6. I'm jumping around a little bit. One, you want to embrace and enable. I think of it less about it in some ways about the digital native as just where's innovation going to come in your organization. And if you could enable the innovative or forward thinking or faster moving parts of the organization to move ahead while still embracing and maintaining the connection to those who are maybe not as ready to move ahead. I mean, think, what are one of the biggest resistances to any upgrade or new IT system? It's often the entrenched processes, learning, people who aren't ready to change. If you could allow those folks to continue to work the way they do while embracing change and innovation, we think that's a really key part of this idea of intelligent information management. But, the other very important part is that this group of digital natives will often be that driver that will pull the organization forward. So embracing them, attracting them, retaining them, letting them often lead, if you will, in terms of how tools can influence work, I think is a really enlightened strategy, if you will, and approach. And I would just say, this leads, interestingly, to, bringing it back from kind of the high-level thoughts to the topic that we're speaking about today, too. Microsoft Teams as this single access point to enterprise data. Interestingly, we say Teams here, but it need not only be Teams. Teams is the forward-looking platform. As Heather was saying, that's the explosion of it, the adoption of it has been really tremendous, or at least the penetration of it. I think the adoption of it is a very interesting part about that and one of the key things we're talking about. But obviously, allowing folks to get access to the information they need within that environment, we believe, and that's been a fundamental part of MFIL's strategy, integrating within those environments is key to enabling transformation, to making that tool more sticky to driving adoption, but at the same time doing that within Outlook or SharePoint to embrace the folks who are more comfortable there, or even in the Office tools. So we think that's kind of a microcosm of this idea of the digital native, embracing teams and enabling that kind of dynamic collaboration while also retaining the similar kind of access to information and support in some of those more traditional ways that folks work, and blending those together. So with that, I'll pass it over to back to you, Heather.
Yeah, I love the digital native concept. It's because it's driving us forward, right? It's the match of digital native to those of us who also came up not digital natives, you know what I mean? And we're all working together to figure out the best ways to collaborate. And, you know, I think connecting the dots for me, I'm very, being, you know, in the role I am and in both our community and with what I do with Content Panda, you know, I think really looking at putting together a champions community for yourselves and leveraging what Microsoft is doing is really important, and figuring out what that business engagement is, and then creating those key teams, and leveraging a couple other really cool things that Microsoft are doing. And I'm going to go through those because we're getting shorter on time. But, you know, the champions community is so important. And I think, you know, setting that context, designing a community to really get organizational change objectives and your vision for Microsoft 365 is so important. And then, you know, identify, get buy-in, build that plan, look at that checklist, and then you execute and iterate, and really doing it with a community, and not on your own. Like, why do it by yourself? I think we suffer alone sometimes when we're trying to make these decisions, and I think a group think on this is really important with many different types of people from your organization. And then looking at, you know, what are those key teams? And this is up on the productivity library for Microsoft. You know, look, does this map to your typical organization? Is it marketing, sales, HR, product management, IT? You can do it any way you want, of course, but looking at sort of some of the suggested templates and ways to roll out teams, I think is really important. So like, why create the wheel, right? And then also learning pathways. If you haven't done this, Learning Pathways is a great tool with a SharePoint communications site that you can bring in to your tenant, and then you can connect to end user training and content. You can also put in a web part, and it's really easy to install using the provisioning service. And this has got a lot of those bite-sized videos that are step-by-step that will take you through onboarding for somebody and how to actually like set up and run a meeting, which that can be such a nightmare for people as well, right? So I think looking at that and bringing that into the program that you're building, I think is really important. And I know we have another poll question about Teams and using it across your company. So I'm sorry, Teresa, I was like, let's do it.
No.
So here we go.
Yeah, here we go. Once again, please come back to your computer keyboards and answer this question.
Yeah.
Is Microsoft Teams in use in your company? And we just want this quick pulse point answer here. Yes, you actively use it. Only some people are using it. No, but you have plans to use Microsoft Teams, or there's no plans at all. So just pick one of those. Let us know what you think on that one, and here's the answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is a mix.
And are they one of 20 million active daily users that was just announced, right? That's a huge number that was just announced this week. Wow.
And I'm actually pleased to see that only 5% of the people who answered this said that no, there's no plans at all. So that means 95% of the folks use or want to use it in some sort of capacity. So that's really encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and Greg, I know you have some stuff about context. Go ahead.
Really interesting data. You know, I was looking at that one too. You know, the small percentage who have no plan, so that really speaks to it. But, you know, the other thing I would just mention here, this idea that context we think is fundamental. So one is access to information in the context where you work every day. That's things like Teams or SharePoint or Outlook. So we really believe that a focus is on that. How do you drive adoption and keep people there while giving them access to information that could be in different locations, but also putting that information in the context of the business need. Hey, we're chatting about something in Teams. We're collaborating about this customer or this client. information that's in the context of that customer client becoming available, accessible, readily findable, if you will, within the context of the chat. So there's some really important elements that we think are cornerstones to intelligent information management. We're really sort of focused on driving that within the Office 365 environment.
Yeah. I love how you talk about that, Greg, and how mFiles does that too. I think I've looked at your methodologies, and I think it's really on point for that. So, I think the thing that, so there's, lots of places to get information, and I gave a workshop, an end user adoption workshop in New Zealand this summer, and, it was one of the things where I always ask people, what do you do? Do you do the 10 things on the checklist? And the biggest thing is that this stuff is hard. Y'all, it is not easy, and it takes a lot of work, and it's a big pain, to be honest, and so start there, in a way, but the thing is that I just never want to recreate the wheel or do things from scratch if I don't have to, right? So I always go and I say very openly, I am it's a flattery, imitation of the best form of flattery, right? So I go to the AKAMS, whack Microsoft Adoption, and I go grab their adoption plans. I go grab the Excel spreadsheet that has those wonderful and terrible lists of a countdown clock, a work back schedule, the T-minus, and all of that stuff. I don't want to build that from scratch ever. And when we work with clients, I'm like, we're not building this from scratch. We're leveraging all this great stuff that's out there for us. And, there's lots of wonderful partners that do that sort of thing and have these plans as well. I could probably name 10 of them right off the top of my head. But also, if we all leverage and use what Microsoft is putting out there, that means we're all on the same page. And that Champions Program information is out there. Those templates are out there. Some of the slides that I grabbed are from that kind of stuff, and I make them my own with people and make sure that they map to the company and what their business drivers are. But at the end of the day, we're all just trying to communicate a little bit more quickly, know where we're going to put our stuff, not feel embarrassed about asking questions about how to do something, and also making sure that if we need to comply with, legal and compliance and all that, that we're doing our jobs there as corporate citizens, right? So I feel like please leverage this stuff. And I definitely will, like I said, send out some presentation links to some things about who, what, where, when, and where to put jazz as well. So I appreciate you letting me spout off about this stuff, but I'm very excited about it, and I know Greg is too. So let's see. Well, we're jumping into thank yous. I think we are. That's how to get a hold of me and for my company. And with Content Panda, we do in-context help, support, and training contextually in all Office 365 apps, and I'm always happy to talk about that with folks. And then, in summary.
Yeah, and I would just, Indeed,
Yeah.
Indeed. Just jumping in, I just summarize again this idea of digital natives and the adoption of technology and their part in that, filling gaps in Office 365. We saw in the first poll about control and compliance and process being important issues. And this idea of Office 365 as a window to all business information. And that's just something I would say, if it's of interest to you, we've got a great sort of, I think, vision for how that can happen. I encourage you to look at it. And that's anchored really in this idea of imagine these core applications within this Office 365 platform, SharePoint, Outlook, and Teams, and the ability then to, in context, access the information that can be out in these other locations, even network folders, but of course up through systems like SharePoint, but not only unstructured content. Think of Salesforce or Dynamics, where structured data is important to adding context. That's really all about what we're trying to speak to. And that leads to this idea of a single point of information. And in mFiles world, we don't feel like that needs to be mFiles. That's about Teams, and that information can be in other locations. And we really want to embrace that and help provide that unified environment that we think is going to drive the future of digital transformation. So with that, I would say, again, thanks from us, mFiles, for attending, and feel free to reach out, and we'd love to talk to you about it more.
Well, thank you. We've been listening to Greg Milliken of mFiles and Heather Newman of Content Panda. And I know we want to get to some questions, but there was another question that I have from when we were talking, and so I'm going to start off this Q&A time frame, and because as many of us know, Microsoft Ignite just happened a couple of weeks ago, and I know, Heather and Greg, that you were both there. So let me start first with Greg. What was the coolest thing that you thought that came out of Ignite, and how that is going to help you help your customer base?
Well, one of the things that jumped out is something that I'm not sure if you were not there, you might not have heard of, but we think it's really profound, and it's directly to this idea that we've been talking about. And it's something Microsoft announced called Project Cortex, and it relates to the idea that information could be in different places and it be contextually organized or accessed around other important business concepts, i.e. customers, projects, cases. That is intelligent information management. So while Microsoft is a big ship and it moves slow, they seem to point in the right direction a lot of times. So we just thought that's huge validation of the M-Files sort of view of the market. Again, not to be overly promotional on but when Microsoft steps in and starts speaking to that idea, I just found that really interesting. So I would encourage you to look into that and see what they're talking about there, and then relate that to what we've been speaking about today.
Yeah, I've been seeing that conversation about Cortex on the AIIM community blog, so people are talking about it. Yes, Greg. Heather, your thoughts. I know you were also there and were an on-the-ground reporter at Ignite. What were some of the cool things that you got out of the event?
Sure. It was an honor to have that position and really fun. So, I'm also a OneNote MVP and happen to be in that team and Threads. OneNote is my favorite, even though I'm a SharePoint person from like forever ago. OneNote, they announced that it's backtracking the decision to discontinue the desktop version of OneNote. So OneNote 2016 will have mainstream support until October 2025. And that's exciting because that's a listening point. When we use user voice, which those of you, if you don't use user voice, you can type in any Microsoft product and type user voice, and you can put what you want in there, and it is really looked at by the engineering teams. And that came about not too long ago where, people were like, I can't get to people. I don't want to just put a bug in. I want to say what I want. And so that was a piece that I was just like, yes, listening mode, love that, New mobile Office app for Android and iOS to bring in the products in an easier way. That was really exciting. We've got that private channels and Teams. And also the integration of Yammer into Teams, into the platform, which was really exciting. And then the new Edge browser was another big one for Windows 10, Mac OS, and Linux using the Chromium engine, and that's going to be coming out January 2020 at some point. So lots of really cool stuff there. And then the other one I really loved also was Azure Arc, which is this new service that allows businesses to manage resources across different cloud vendors. So not just your Azure storage, but Google Cloud or Amazon AWS, and it works with Kubernetes and Linux and Windows. So, the open source nature of things and using GitHub and really, saying, hey, we want to understand that that everybody we use Microsoft, but we use other things, and why not connect to those to make them easier to work together so that it actually thinks about how people use different things or legacy systems, and it's not even legacy or just systems that they like, right? So to me, that was really exciting. And the Project Cortex stuff too was super cool as well. But yeah, a lot of great announcements and a lot of great content out there and available from Ignite on demand for people to jump into as well. Somebody just asked about explaining Project Cortex. Do you want me to answer that real quick?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, cool. So it's about creating a knowledge database, a network in an organization. So it's going to use machine learning to analyze the documents and contacts across your organization and outside patterns, and then have that information be available in Office apps like Outlook and Teams, so that something may get a highlight, you can click on it, and it'll tell you more about what it is. and where to go for resources about it, unrelated topics, unrelated topics. So it's looking at the behind the scenes of what you do as an organization, and it'll be able to give you some machine learning AI pop-ups about certain things in different areas. I don't know everything about it yet. It's still coming out, but it looks really interesting. So I would look at the keynote from Satya Nadella about Project Cortex on that one.
Cool.
Yeah, and also feel free to reach out to me. You guys might be able to locate me. I'd be more than happy to talk about it. It's really a cool concept.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to say, that between the folks at M-Files and Heather Newman and Content Panda, there's a lot of really good consultative resources that these two companies can help you with, and certainly the folks at M-Files can help you make the most of your Microsoft 365 applications within your organization. So I encourage you to reach out to both of them, check the wealth of resources that we put in there. And Heather and I have been having this back channel text conversation that we're even going to continue the conversation out on the AIM community blog. So just look for some more cool stuff that we're going to put out there. I just wanted to let you know in general, if you haven't heard, that AIM offers a variety of different training programs. We offer them as live instructor-led programs, as well as online and self-paced classes on a variety of different topics. And we can even arrange for a trainer to come to your place of business and provide that customized perspective of our instructor-led programs. And there's also AIM's Certified Information Professional, and this is a certification that's dedicated to enhancing and promoting the profession of information management. And for me, the really cool thing is we have a class that was recently written earlier this year on the fundamentals of intelligent information management. And not only is it a very helpful overview to all things information management related, but it's also an excellent review to help you prepare to take the CIP certification exam. So all the stuff that AIM has on training is available at aim.org/training. So check it out. Let us know if you have any questions about that. Some team of people here, they'll gladly answer your questions and help you through with that. And we are getting at the end of our webinar time today. We have recorded this webinar, and you'll be able to come back and listen to it again. We're going to email everyone the link to the replay. I encourage you to download those resources, and also please take the feedback survey. As I mentioned earlier, I greatly value the feedback that you provide, and I really do read every one of those responses. Very much want to thank our underwriter, M-Files. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM would not be able to bring you these free educational programs. So, M-Files, thank you very much for your sponsorship. I value that. And as we bring this webinar to a close, I want to leave everyone with our speakers' closing thoughts today. So I'm going to start first with Greg Milliken of M-Files. Your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I would just say that clearly the market and the poll that we saw, folks are embracing Office 365 and encourage that. I mean, maybe that's no big surprise, but the idea that there's a lot of focus on how to apply control and process and governance to make those tools deliver that kind of capability that enterprises are looking for, while still enabling this new collaborative world and connectivity that we're all coming to rely upon. So I would just say it's an exciting time. There's some great tools. Again, I would not being overly promotional on M-Files, but emphasize this is really where we've been focusing, and would love to just talk with you about what we're doing and hear about your challenges or ways that you could be benefited if you were able to bring that kind of control or process to the Office 365 environment. So thanks, Teresa.
Thank you, Greg. And Heather Newman of Content Panda, your closing thoughts.
I think that, these are big jobs with a lot of detail in there, but I think, again, I kind of always go back to, if you don't have a plan, failing to plan is planning for failure. And I think that one of the things I hear over and over again when I do workshops and give presentations out in the world on this stuff is that, people will say, yeah, I created a plan, but nobody likes, putting things into plans, unfortunately. And, some people do. That's a small percentage of us. But I do think that planning, end user adoption and digital changes, it never stops. Right? You're always iterating on it because we're getting new things thrown at us all the time. But I think being able to create an adoption plan, to create some change management, and then you shampoo, you rinse and repeat over and over again and add to that plan as you go along. But the basics really still are the basics. It's the why are you doing it? What's the value? Who is on the team to help make those decisions? And I've asked people before. I'm like, okay, they're like, oh, it failed, and or we've done that. And I said, well, which one of the checklists did you really not do? And always somebody's like, okay, well, we didn't actually have executive buy-in. I'm like, okay, well, then you got to do that in order for it to work, right? So I think that being, even scrumming some of this out and being really diligent about that planning, and it's hard because you're not only just putting technology out there, you are dealing with human beings and asking them to change behaviors. And, I've had people, even with Content Panda, that are like, I don't really want to learn anything new. And I'm like, all you have to do is click a button and it helps you. And they're like, no, I'm not sure. And usually through some conversation, we figure out, that they've, tried something, brought something in, and it failed. And, people don't like failure, and people are afraid of losing their jobs, So I think really putting the plan together and trusting a team to do that with each other is going to really help with that driving digital change with Office 365, with the umbrella of Microsoft 365 into people's organizations. That's what I think about that.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. That's all we have time for. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you with our next webinar. And have a great day.
Bye, everybody.